Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and wherever you are in this wide, wonderful, beautiful world that you live in. Thank you for joining me. You are truly welcome to the Global Sales Leader podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cooper. I'm the sales relationship coach, high performance sales trainer, and who's someone who deeply is curious about what it takes to lead, influence, and perform at the highest level, not just in sales, but in life. And I can talk about that at a later stage. But this podcast is all about meaningful conversations with experts, trailblazers, and thought leaders from every corner of the globe. We delve into real life drivers of success, sales leadership, strategy, behavior, psychology, decision making, emotional intelligence, mindset, nonverbal communication, body language, and everything else that help people perform at their peak and highest potential and connect with clarity and purpose, but also create that ripple effect forward of golden nuggets of knowledge, inspiration, and thoughts. So, what makes this space different is the human angle of what we're going to be talking about. It's not about sales techniques, as we explore plenty of those. It's all about the behind of what. It's all about how and the behind of results. It's all about who, because relationships are everything. So, thanks. You'll be able to listen to this podcast on YouTube as well as your other audio podcast channels out there. So, you're very welcome. And I have a wonderful guest today, Jed. Hello.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you. My very warm introduction. So, a little bit about you and like, on its very top levels, what I've stolen from your websites and everything else. So, for over 30 years of retail industry experience gained in-store supply chain as a senior buyer, manager of UK's largest grocery retailers, Jed's background is unique. He regularly provides industry insights via TV, radios, print publications, and the grocer. I remember the grocer many years ago. I spent hours and hours trawling through that when I was in retail, well over 25 years ago. So I do know that quite well. And he's the UK's GSCOP expert. What is that?
GSCOP, that is the Grocery Supplied Code of Practice. So that's what 14 designated retailers, multiple retailers, have to adhere to when they're working with some of their, well, with all of their suppliers.
All right. Now you've educated me, which is really good. Anything else that you'd like to add based on your background to date so we can get things flowing forward?
Yeah, so basically what I've been doing, so that the retail part is what is my mainstay, but what I've been doing for the past 10 years, and it's 10 years from the last start of last month, 10 years now, what I do is I work with suppliers. I work with suppliers, manufacturers, charities to help them work better with their customers. So I don't work with any retailers. It's just anybody in all those different sectors to help them work better, because that's what I'm passionate about. Is doing things simple and making relationships stronger.
We're totally aligned there. And what really intrigued me, because we have a mutual friend, and I looked at your profile and went, "Oh, that's going to be fantastic for the podcast." And I haven't had anyone like you yet, so you're quite unique. And hopefully there's a compliment in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I like being unique. I think there's always value in being unique.
Yeah. So, from the perspective of the audience, and I'm always curious because from the perspective of a buyer, I want to go through that angle at first, and then we can elaborate and unpeel the onion from there. Because when salespeople come in to meet you as a buyer, what key attributes do you take from them as a sales perspective? From you looking at them, going, I either like them or dislike them. What are the key attributes do you look for initially?
For me, it's coming in and being a person, and that for me, that's the most important thing. Because actually, is business, selling, relationships. It's a person doing business with a person. It's not a name. It's not a title. I mean, I've had all sorts of different titles when I was at Asda, but to me, the title was meaningless. And actually, what's more important is the relationships that I had and could build, and that I could trust and actually would look long term. So rather than transactional, because I always looked for relationships which are long term rather than transactional ones. I understand at times there's a need for transactional relationships, but that's not where I operated at my best.
So, what were the key things that stood out for you? I know the human side of things and everything else, but for me, meeting you the first time if you had the buyer hat, and I was just introducing myself, what are the key attributes that you would pull out and going, that works and that doesn't?
One of the key one is does the person listen? So when we're having conversations, is it just a series of questions to which they get an answer, or is it a series of questions which they listen to and respond back to what I'm saying? And for me to do exactly the same thing as well. So because then that shows that it's not just on their agenda. They're listening to what's in front of them. They can hear that. Okay, well, that's something of interest. Why am I going to go down? And what that does, it builds rapport. And that's what for me, one of the most important things in any relationship, business-wise, it's the rapport that you have with any of your customers. That rapport will get you and achieve so much more than just having short-term transactional relationships.
Good. I'm delighted that you actually said that. So that really confirms the approach that I've learned along the way, because it's not about it's not about the short term. It's about the long term gain for both parties, and so you can get that Stephen Covey matrix of that win-win for both parties, because you're winning because you're getting something that you aspire to have or would like to have or think that would fit into the marketplace that you actually serve. So getting into those, how long would it normally take as an introduction to actually say, Jed, I really like that. What's the next steps after that?
When you're working as a buyer, everything always takes time.
Mm,
So because normally if you're working with someone, if you're working with someone and trying to sell you something, then you only have a limited number of times when you can make those changes. So sometimes those changes might be 6, 9, 12 months ahead. If you're working with someone and you're developing a private label, an own label product, that we used to have a joke that actually you could have a baby quicker than you could launch an own label product, because it takes that long. It takes 12 months. There's process that needs to be involved. So the conversations as you go through those journeys, that's when you start to build and look at how's it going to work long term. But before that, you've got to set things up. So you'll go, what is the opportunity? What are we looking at? How are we going to work together to sort of to grow the categories that we're working in?
And who else would be involved in this decision making on your side?
That's one of the reasons why I liked being a buyer. I didn't realize it until I became a buyer that actually what I like is that control. And actually, as a buyer, everything comes through you. Well, I think that's what a good buyer will do. So a good buyer, the decisions, you're not in charge of all the different people that you're working with. You might have maybe 1 or 2 junior buyers or trading assistants, but you are working with 10, 20, sometimes 30 different teams. And what you've got to do is you've got to influence those teams. But what you have to have as a buyer, you have to have a clear vision. You have to have a clear vision of what you want your category to be, what you want your fixture to be, the hierarchy, all of that. So it's about control. And I hadn't realized just that actually how much of a control freak I was until I became a buyer. And it's like, actually, yeah, this is great. I've got all the control.
And you spoke about, and it was suggested on your LinkedIn about it being a good experience and good buying experience. And let me just get the quote up itself, because I want to make sure that I'm clear with what I'm saying. It's as you held multi-million-pound budgets, which is great. Yet the best suppliers, which is the salespeople actually you're working, is to understand the power of balance. And what does that mean? What do you mean by that?
the balance of power is all about, well, okay, well, who holds the power, and do they understand whether they hold the power? What does that power actually mean? So when you're working in grocery retail, particularly in the UK, you hold a lot of power.
Yep.
So the contracts, the areas that I looked after, there were about £500 million of sales that I had. So you're working with suppliers, and that your decisions matter.
Yeah.
But what you can understand then is actually, well, I can abuse that power. And if you're abusing that power, then in effect, what you're abusing is your title, the status that you actually have as a buyer to get people to do what they want, what you want them to do. And that's how some buyers will work. It's a more brutal way of doing it. It doesn't build and foster relationships.
No.
But then at the same time, you also understand as a buyer, there are times when the balance of power is actually in the supplier's favor, that you're working with that supplier, and that supplier is your only alternative.
Yeah.
So when you're working in those instances, I had that a number of different instances where I was working. Actually, there's the only person that I could get that product or that range from. So the balance of power, it's not in my favor. So you have to understand where the power sits. And certainly what I saw during my time as a buyer for nearly 15 years, I saw that balance of power change. And the balance of power moved. It shifted from the retailers, from the buyers, and it shifted to the suppliers. And now the reality was that it shifted, but what actually I saw is for most suppliers, they hadn't realized that the balance of power shifted. The reason why it shifted is there's, in so many industries, consolidation was taking place. When you have consolidation taking place, the power shifts, and that happens, and it's happening all the time.
So I'm really fascinated on this because having the power, then not having the power as much, that puts your decision-making criteria under duress. And if that's the only place that you can go, where do you get that win-win in your decision-making process?
You get the win by leaving the biggest barrier to success at the door. And what you leave at the door is your ego.
Like that.
And that's where a lot of people fail, because they feel that actually, well, I haven't got any power, so I have to try and make some power. It's like, well, why? What, you both want the same thing. You both want to sell. You both want to buy. So why you don't need that. So leave your ego at the door and look at how you're going to grow things and work together. That's what you have to do, and that's where success lies.
Like that, because you have to keep both sides. You have to keep building that mutual respect and that mutual rapport, especially if you've been working with a particular person for a number of years, and then you get to know each other, which then you can have a slightly better way of negotiating. And that's my next point that I want to get into. Negotiation. I know part of what I've read from your website, and I know it's part of what you are now doing, if I'm correct in saying that.
Yes.
So let's have a look at the negotiations from the buyer's perspective, and then link it back into what you do right now, because I'm curious. Because some things that I do is the negotiation and negotiation skills, and there is a set template that you can follow in negotiation. But let's have a look at authentic negotiations, because I think that's the right path to go. Building that trust, building that mutual respect with the person, but negotiating there. What would you do in the minds of the buyer from point of view?
My negotiation style changed during my time as I learned more about the craft that I was doing, as I had more different training. And actually, to be honest, I discarded a large part of the training that I had, because I felt it was too blunt. I felt it was not addressing the most important part of a negotiation, which is people. And you have to understand that that's what you're dealing with. So if you want to work in a way which looks at extremes, then that's one way of doing it. You're never going to get the best out of that. I always think there's two different ways that you could have a negotiation. Actually, you could hold someone's feet to the fire and to get them to negotiate that way, or you negotiate in such a way that actually they'll walk over hot coals for you. And that's how I always wanted to work. I worked in a way which was collaborative, strategic, and long term. And if you work in that way, you get the best results every single time.
I like that because I've been on a lot of negotiation. I've read a lot of negotiation, and it is quite regimented, and I see it all the time, but doesn't add personality to it. And I think effective communication, I know that's a key buzzword here, but it is. It's a people relationship. It's a people negotiation. It's not. You are a person. You're not AI. I know you're a real person. You can't negotiate with AI. But we have to build in those relationships with you. And I always suggest is, even when I do training, is take the person, take the humanity into what you're doing into whether you're selling or whether you're building relationships or whatever you're doing, it pays dividends again and again. And you've just confirmed that.
Yeah. I think the other most important part is, look, if you go in with a set process and say, right, this is how my negotiation is going to work, the likelihood is you'll fail, because a good negotiator is someone who can read the room, and that's what you will do. Is, okay, well, what is, you go in and you'll sense actually is I came in with one plan, and actually that plan is not going to work. So you then have to be able to thinking, right, well, what am I going to do differently? And that's what, for me, whether it's sales, negotiating, or influence, you have to be able to read the room. And that's where, what the phrase that you talked about earlier, emotional intelligence, that's where that emotional intelligence comes in. You can see, actually, you know what, I've got to do something differently.
So how can you build on that emotional intelligence? Is it a learnt behavior, or is it just a gut feel? Or I do know the answer here, but I'm going to throw in the question back to you. Because there's such a big thing on it nowadays, and the new generation coming through, and they're suggesting that no, they don't know their emotional intelligence. I don't necessarily agree with that. We're all born with innate ability there, but it's up to us to just bring it out. So what are the key tactics that maybe you have learned along the way that you can feed it forward to the listeners that are listening now as something, that an approach that you've learnt, whether it's the gut feel or whether it's something else? Could you describe what that looks like?
So that, I mean, that the emotional intelligence, I mean, it is something that I went through workshops for when I was at Asda. But when you're doing it, you actually, I realized that some of the work that the workshop on emotional intelligence was actually adding on to other workshops that I'd had. And what that all came down to is understanding yourself. Understanding yourself. What are the hot buttons that pressed you, and you think, actually, oh, why am I thinking like this? Why am I behaving like this? So understanding that part is important. And why is somebody else behaving like that? So there's all sorts of different ways that you can improve your own emotional intelligence. But actually, it's just taking time to think. And I do think that emotional intelligence is still about leaving that ego behind. So, and it's right. Okay, well, I'm dealing with people, and people will react, and I will have to deal with how they react.
Yeah, it is. Like, we're all complicated people, really, at the end of the, and everyone is slightly different, and we all have our different personality traits behind us, whether you go with all the research that is out there. But we are different, and we have to match the difference between the person that you're working with to how you work, but also try and meet in the middle. I know there's mirroring and all that sort of techniques in there, but not really. If you get on with someone, you automatically do it anyway, because people like people, and brands they like trust and they connect with. But it's also that human connection side of things, which is also quite apparent. So let's switch it on a little bit more, because we spoke about this from your perspective of 3 decades and 15 years at working in Asda as a senior buyer. That's That must be quite a stressful job in itself, because the big KPI numbers orientated, I can imagine. So once you branched out of that, what made you pivot and change?
I'd always planned to work for myself. I left Asda when I was 40. Well, I was just 42.
And
And
you're
I thought,
43 now.
I'm 53 now. So, and I thought I was going to be, I'll work for myself when I was 50. My plan was to leave Asda, go and work for a supplier, broaden my skills, do something different. And that plan didn't happen. Asda and I, as happens in lots of corporate organizations, my time at Asda came to an end, and Asda said, your time here is done. And that then led me to thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do? I had a job lined up, which disappeared, and I had a 3 months garden leave. And during that 3 months garden leave, I spoke to different people in some suppliers I worked with and said, okay, well, if I start doing this, then would you be interested? And that was the G-Scope training. And that's how I started. I did just that for maybe the first couple of years. And then over the past sort of 8 years, branched out and done more bits and pieces now to think about, okay, well, how do you work better with your customers? Everything that I do is from the perspective of a buyer. Why does a buyer do what they do? I was also, when I was at Asda, I was a trainer there as well. So I've been training now people for 20 years. So I did training, and I did everything from emotional intelligence up to full 2-day change management workshops. So I knew how to put training together. I knew how to make, and I know how to make it engaging, how to make it relevant. And that, for me, that's the most important part, actually, is I don't want any of my relationships and the training that I have to be transactional. I want to understand the customers that I work with. How can I add value to what they're doing, and make sure that when they're working with their customers, that they get better relationships? And that's the most important part.
Yeah, I totally concur. I'm a little bit OCD when it comes to that part. I really want to understand the buyer's journey, not the seller's journey, because there's nothing really to do about that. It's the buyer's journey and what affects them, and what of the pains and things that they're thinking about, as opposed to what the seller is and the methodologies and all of that. Okay, we can look at that later on, but it's the key things about their successes, their pains, their worries, their concerns behind everything that they do. And then if we listen to that, then we can actually branch out and go, well, if there was a solution to that, let's have a look at something. And then we can both collaborate. So one of your words that we used a little bit earlier. And I think collaboration in developing something that's going to be impactful, relevant, but also sticky to the brain.
Yeah. And I think the way that you do that is by listening, and properly listening. And I think that's one of the hardest things for most people to do now, is because the world today operates so quickly that people move on quickly. And the brain works and processes things faster than people can speak. So we know that actually when the words are coming out, your brain is already thinking about the next bit, because the brain processes faster than we can speak. So that's the reality. So when you're listening, you're already multiple steps ahead. So finding a way to listen properly is really quite hard.
It is. It's a muscle that needs to be trained. Like if you go down to the gym, you work out, but if you don't be consistent with working out, you're never going to improve. And your goal is to improve, and that's like me going running or whatever. So you have to consistently do it and practice it more and more and more, and listening back to what people said. And even sometimes we know we talk, depending on the person, in about 200 words per minute, but we think in about 600 to 800 words per minute. And our mind is constantly distracted by that, and 50 to 80,000 thoughts per day. So focused in rather than listening and go, you're drifting off thinking about dinner tonight and everything else and other things. And especially in this remote world that we're living in, and we're like focusing in that conversation where your phone is over there and you got other things going on in the background. But to intently listen is, I think that's a gift that keeps on giving if you're doing it right.
Yeah, I agree, and he's right. It takes training, and you have to keep on at it. And now, as a buyer, one of the things I would always do is I was listening out for every single word. So it was my job. So I was listening. Well, what, and then I would interpret what those words. And if people said the wrong type of word, to bring in any doubt in, that's what I'd be picking up and still listen. But I also understand and still do that you have to create that environment for better listening.
Yeah.
So, and if you are surrounded by all sorts of external things that are going on, if it's the time of day when people are going to be distracted by something else, whether it is post lunch, pre-lunch, on a Friday to afternoon, these are all distractions which make it harder for people to listen. So I think depending on the meeting that you have to think very carefully about what day, what time of day, and where that meeting takes place, just to make sure that both parties are able to listen properly.
You spoke about times of day, and I was listening to something on the radio, or I don't know where it was. Anyway, they were speaking about a judge that were making decisions on people and actually making the right decisions for them, whether they go into trial or whether they go into, and so on and so forth. But they were talking about better times to make decisions, like bigger decisions. Like if you're making a decision before lunch, you're hungry and you're thinking about hungry. Or if it's like the 3 o'clock slump and we all get it, or if the person hasn't had enough sleep, or they feel agitated, or there's something going on with them. So they do suggest like first thing in the morning is where the brain's a little bit more fresh and stimulated. My brain is a lot more fresh and stimulated in the morning. In the afternoon, I have to think about other tasks. So thinking about the right decision making to make a really good buying decision is critical. I just go back to that point because it just reminded me of something.
I agree, but I would also know is that there are certain times when, as a buyer, I knew that I could use the time of day to my advantage. So if I was buying, so one of the things I used to buy seed oil, so vegetable oil and sunflower oil, and I had one manufacturer who was based in the UK and another manufacturer who was based in Europe. But all of it was traded coming out of Amsterdam, and it was traded on the commodity market. The commodity market closed at 5 o'clock. So I knew that if I did any negotiation between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, then the clock was ticking. So I could use that time as a pressure. So I would always know what price I was looking for and would get, but I could use that as a lever when I was in a negotiation. But those kind of negotiations, they're few and far between. Very rarely do you have something where the clock is truly ticking.
You can use scarcity in the right way sometimes, and that's scarcity on steroids. But that particular customer, because you knew the decision-making criteria behind that, and I do believe that scarcity does work, but it has to be done in the right way. And someone reached out to me on LinkedIn today and said, I've only got one position left to go on to their workshops. I have no interest in it because they didn't give me any reason to go on to it. So I said, no, thanks, not my focus. Scarcity tactics only work in the right way at the right time if it's true. But you have to rely on the truism behind it so it will work authentically and in the right place at the right time.
I absolutely agree, and that's, I think, the most important word there was authentic, and that's something that I've been passionate about. But I think you grow into it.
Mm.
And so when you are at the early stages of your career, you look around and you don't know who you want to be. So you think, I want to be like that person. But then eventually what you should do is actually, you know what? I don't want to be like anybody else. I want to take bits of what I see from all the different people and I'll make those bits into me. And then you're authentic, and then you feel much more comfortable in your skin saying, look, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is why I'm doing what I do. The job that I do, most of the training that I do is actually, when you put it down, it's helping people.
Yep.
That's what I do. That's what I like doing. So if they've got a problem, I like to help people. And how can they be better at what they do? How can the relationships that they have with their customers be better? And if I can use the skills that I learned, and I, as a buyer at Asda, I was trained relentlessly in so many ways, not just on negotiation, but on the softer skills like emotional intelligence, listening, all those things that matter, the things that matter. And I was surrounded by some brilliant retail minds. So I saw those and I picked up on those over my years. And that's what I want to help and give the insight to the people that I'm working with now.
I think that's absolutely core. And if people learn one thing out of today's podcast is truly using, I'm going to say a couple of things actually, because there's more than one thing. And I don't know why I said that. The couple of things is listening intently, understanding you, throw the ego out, drop the E and just go, and trust your gut feel, bit of critical mind behind that, be a human person, be having those human skills behind everything that you do. And again, stuff that I do is pull in all the resources that are around you and make it your own.
I agree. And I think we're in a world now which is obsessed with data. And what I always think, look, data is critical to helping you make a decision. But what data does is data looks backwards about what has happened.
Yeah.
What I loved about being a buyer, and one of the things I love about now actually is I'm looking forward to I'm making things happen. So yes, data can help me make the decision, but that's not the reason why I do it. It's not based on data. It's based on actually, you know what? This is what I see. This is the opportunity that I see. This is what I want to create. That for me, that's more important than just saying the data tells me how to do that. If we did everything by data, God, what a dull world.
Yeah, it will be. Final question for today, and my stock question. If you were interviewing you, what sort of questions would you ask you?
I would ask me why I want to keep on doing what I'm doing, because I enjoy what I'm doing. But I'd also say, actually, well, what is it that motivates you? Now, that's something that I hadn't truly reflected on until maybe about 3 years ago. I thought, actually, well, what is it? What's the motivator behind what I do? Why do I do it? And it's because I don't like people throwing their own the power around. And I saw that balance of power, and I still see it. So that's the question is why, what motivates you to do what you do and to keep doing it after 10 years?
Phenomenal. Excellent. So thank you so much, Jed, today. It's I love the perspective today. And I know feeding forward, and as I suggested when we started, it's golden nuggets forward. And it's also reminding people, but seeing it from a different point of view, from a different lens and a different perspective. And that's what I like about these conversations that we had. So really appreciate that. How can people find out more about you?
I'm quite simple. I don't have a huge amount of social media other than LinkedIn or the Retail Mind website. So that is it. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and it's Jed Futter. And you can go to the website. They're the two places that I'm available.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we've spoken about what makes the space and difference between the human angle is about people. It's about we exploring the minds and how and their whys behind everything that we do. And whether you're tuning in at your desk or on a run or in the gym or commuting, take a moment to yourself, listen, learn, and apply, and to reflect and to grow forward, and to take a breath and stay curious and get ready, because this is where stories spark insights and fuels action. So you've listened to the Global Sales Leader podcast. You can find out more about me on jasoncooper.io, and I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm absolutely everywhere, all over LinkedIn. So always want to hear any feedback, always want to hear any comments and ideas. So thank you once again.
Thank you.